while in our relationship. But in terms of like underneath that, our actual connection and love for each other, we always like would find a way back to each other because we really, really do love each other.
So yeah, I think that's something that wasn't shown a lot of. Is Sandy and I started as very, very good friends, and we did have a physical connection, but she had come out of a relationship. I was very much ready to commit. I had been at a point in my life with her where we had been dating, but I was ready, and she wasn't, and she was very honest about that. But I had to essentially say at this point, like, I can't continue to be physical with you anymore because I'm not getting the emotional side of you that I'm yearning for. And
he kind of gave me like a mini ultimatum,
yeah,
like
and
exactly.
I did, and then I started to see somebody else, and she came.
Wow, you and I are the same, Nick.
Full twist, and said, I recognize that I love you. I recognize that I want to be in a relationship with you. I am here to commit. That relationship that I was in was very easy to depart from, and we then made a commitment to each other. We'd always had a lot.
Hey guys, and welcome to Little Black Bird 91. We're talking to you guys about the avoidant trigger cycle trap. What is that? Well, when you have two avoidants in a relationship, oftentimes it can be a fearful avoidant and a dismissive avoidant, but it can be fearful avoidant and fearful avoidant too. What you can find is that there is this trigger cycle that tends to happen between both people. They both do behaviors that trigger the other person. So let me give an example. A triggers B, but B is triggered by A. And so because it's triggered by A, does a behavior that then triggers A to trigger B again. I hope you're following what I'm saying. This cycle continues because both people are triggered by the behavior or the reaction by the other party. When I look at Nick and Sandy, they fit this particular avoidant trigger cycle trap. They both do behaviors that actually elicit unsafe feelings from one another. We're going to break down a few of those things in this video. So if you're somebody who identifies with being avoidant, we're going to break that down. That's something that John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, who are psychologists in the UK, made an experiment between young children and their parent caregiver. What they found out is that the way that children attached to their caregiver often dictated also how they or how it affected them, how they also connected with people in their adult relationships. And so when we talk about avoidance, what we really are saying is people that often try to avoid very close, intimate interactions with people. They don't trust people very easily. They trust themselves, but not others. And they struggle to say what their wants and needs are and be able to really allow themselves to be interdependent because they're so independent. They're afraid that if they do allow people to be there for them, they will let them down. So they've been born into the world full of neglect as a child and have seen days where their needs and wants went amiss, and they would have to find a way for themselves to self-soothe and be self-sufficient in meeting their own needs. And so when they shop in relationships, the avoidant aspect is them actually pushing the other person away and keeping a distance. But what do you do, or how does it affect people when you have two people playing the North Pole? How does that work? Well, actually what you'll see is that you'll see that behaviors that each person does triggers the other person to move away, but the moving away triggers the other person to also move away. And depending on what particular avoidant attachment style they have, for instance, dismissive versus fearful avoidant, can really make people actually get stuck in this avoidant trigger cycle trap. We're going to break down a little bit more about what that actually is and how it plays a role in Nick and Sandy's relationship. If this is something that you potentially have gone through, then maybe this is a video for you to watch. You probably want to be able to tap in a little bit and see what more we're going to talk about, because we're going to break it all the way down for you guys to be able to help you guys navigate this thing, get understanding, get insight, to hopefully jumpstart the thought process in your mind about maybe where you are in your relationship. Well, before we do, like, share, subscribe, click on that bell button for notifications of the uploads. We appreciate you guys. Stay locked, stay loaded. Let's drop an intro, and then we're going to go into it. Little black book, you know what time it is. You know what time it is.
You know what time it is.
All right, let's play a bit more of the clips to get you to understand what I mean by this avoidant trigger cycle trap. In summary, relationships can feel like tell when both people are the cause of the other person's trigger. You trigger me, I trigger you in turn, and as we go back and forth, the cycle goes on. The cycle is an ongoing trap. It's an attachment trap where attachment styles trigger one another. And for instance, an avoidant triggering an anxious person provides two people insight into their behavior. For instance, an avoidant avoiding close intimacy will trigger an anxious person to want to cling on even more. But the more that the anxious person begins to cling on more, the more the avoidant person wants to back away. And so in this scenario, what I do believe that with Nick and Sandy is I think we're seeing two avoidants. I think we can potentially be saying Sandy is a fearful avoidant, and we can potentially say that Nick can be a dismissive avoidant. But I don't even like saying that, because I think in this instance, Nick might actually also be a fearful avoidant with the way that he also behaved and the way that he crashed out through the series. But if you're not really aware of what attachment styles are, let's just bring up a quick slide so you can also see what that actually is before we go into anything. So attachment theory, really quickly, is a psychological explanation for the emotional bonds relationship between people. Okay. And again, it was done by John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. Okay. What I want to just focus on quickly, again, is those particular areas: dismissive and fearful avoidant, right? But I think we might be dealing with two fearful avoidants. We usually don't have that, but I think we might be. So the fearful avoidant is fearful of rejection, the abandonment and betrayal, and they feel they are bad or unlovable and have low self-esteem. Dismissive avoidants are hyper-independent, distance self from intimacy and vulnerability, and have a fear of rejection. I think when we look at obviously Sandy and Nick in their relationship, right, we do see Nick and Nick crashing out because he finally got to see his partner with somebody else, right? Before then, actually, Sandy describes to us how avoidant he actually was. She actually describes that in the relationship that they were formulating, he was a avoidant. So we're going to play a little clip and go into that, and then we'll kind of chop it up from there, and we'll break some more stuff for you down. Listen to this.
And why I'm like, what's going on is because all of a sudden it switched, right? Because it got real, because we didn't know how intense it was going to be. And I think his real heart and like feelings for me showed up like the second we got there. But you guys have to understand, before we got there, it was not like that. But that wasn't because he didn't love me or actually want to be with me. It was just because he was running from his own things or whatnot. So it was like you were avoidant in the relationship. And I moved into the experience with that like all over me. And then I was.
Now, it's really interesting. She says very, very clearly here that he was avoidant. And absolutely right. He was avoidant, right? So as she describes, he actually avoided a lot of their major conversations and issues within a relationship. In fact, one of them was boundaries, but then had the silent expectation. One thing you must understand about insecure attachments, which is basically anything with fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, or even anxious attachment, right? What you must understand, the three columns here, anxious, dismissive, and fearful avoidant, what you must understand is that they are insecure attachment styles. And because of that, what tends to happen is they tend to use passive aggressive means to be able to get their needs met. And within that space, what can also happen is that they will deal with the other party according to what they feel best suits them, right? There can be a lot of power and control issued in that. Now, him obviously avoiding some stuff in the relationship, we know that obviously he went numb because he was drinking, he was doing drugs as well, but he was actually avoiding his actual pain and not wanting to deal with it, which was what was causing also a rift and a distance in the relationship. What that does is it triggers the other party. Now, let's just take, for instance, as an example, that he's dismissive avoidant. And I believe that Sandy's more fearful avoidant because of what she has said in the previous aspects of the show. Let's say she's more fearful avoidant. Him being avoidant will force her into the anxious state. And do you know how we kind of know that? We know that because she became a caretaker. And one of the things about anxious people is they will go into the caretaking role real fast. And the reason being is because they want external validation. They're afraid of being abandoned, and they feel they must earn love. Okay. Now, this is really important because Sandy lets us know early in the season about the fact that she feels like not good enough at points, or she feels like she's put everybody else's needs before her, right? And so in that space, she ended up playing a caretaker role. One thing about fearful avoidance is that they can be a little bit codependent. But let's look at this clip.
Just like, oh, you know, he's having a breakdown, like, and we're back at home and after the bar. It's like, this was different and he really needed me in that moment. I didn't show up for him. And that really hurts me because I've showed up for you so much throughout our relationship. Like, I really have. And like, that sucks, you know? That's like, it's really difficult to watch, honestly.
I think you said in that moment.
So she obviously lets us know how much she showed up in the relationship. And what does she mean by that? Well, what she means by that is that she's always been in a space of being a caretaker for him, right? And that she also had to be a support for him in that space. Now, that in itself is a trigger, because what ends up happening is that she's forced into her anxious state and into her service mode and into a place of trying to earn the affection and care of her partner. So him being avoidant flips her into an anxious space where she's trying to earn the affection, earn the care of her partner, and willing to endure things that don't need to be endured simply because she needs to prove that she's lovable, that someone wants her, someone cares about her, and someone appreciates her. This is a natural trigger that can happen in that particular space. And so with Nick and Sandy, again, once more, we're going to also talk about the power struggle that they go into, which triggers each other as well, because it's a massive power struggle. So let's go into that as well and break that down.
I think it has to do with some of the kind of the emotional turmoil or whatnot that Nick had been going through. And obviously, like, you can speak more to it. But there was just a lot of like instability, I think, in terms of like the surface level of our dynamic and our lifestyle and our relationship. But in terms of like underneath that, our actual connection and love for each other, we always like would find a way back to each other because we really, really do love each other. So
yeah, I think that's something that wasn't shown a lot of. Is Sandy and I started as very, very good friends, and we did have a physical connection, but she had come out of a relationship. I was very much ready to commit. I had been at a point in my life with her where we'd been dating, but I was ready, and she wasn't, and she was very honest about that. But I had to essentially say at this point, like, I can't continue to be physical with you anymore because I'm not getting the emotional side of you that I'm yearning for.
Now, you notice immediately when they were talking about, this was actually talking about why they broke up so much. They actually broke up quite a few times in the relationship. They broke up 5 to 6 times in the course of 9 months. And the reason being is because, one, they had no conflict resolution. Number 2, because they actually wanted different things. He wanted commitment. She didn't want commitment. Number 3, their ideas of what that safety in a relationship looked like was different. And because what's needed from both of them was stability. But guess what? Neither of them was able to provide a stability for each other. He was emotional volatile, and she would respond in kind by potentially not being present, maybe not being around, not being a party goer, doing what she wanted to do, right? And so you find that there's a trigger for both people in that space, that neither person wants to give up the power. And actually, this is actually something that is spoken about quite well by Thais Gibson, because she speaks about the power struggle stage between couples of avoidancy, right, where they are jostling for power because each individual person doesn't want to seem like they care too much, doesn't want to seem overly overly dependent. They are afraid of vulnerability. They don't want to share their wants and needs, and it becomes this power struggle of silent expectations, which we're going to play another clip for in a second or two.
And
he kind of gave me like a mini ultimatum,
Yeah,
like,
and
exactly.
I did, and then I started to see somebody else, and she came
Wow, you and I are the same, Nick.
full twist and said, I recognize that I love you. I recognize that I want to be in a relationship with you. I am here to commit. That relationship that I was in was very easy to depart from. And we then made
and like really dive into all of it. And I think with that, I was kind of like delusional a little bit, like not really able to actually see what was going on. And I just had so much resentment. I was like, you wanted to do this and now we're doing it and now you're upset.
Did you have to convince her to do it?
No.
I mean, no, but he wanted to do it. He was all on board.
Did
and
you not want to do it?
I didn't want to do it at first. And then we
But
went through the process and I was very
never
like,
happened.
if it happens, it happens. Like, fine, whatever. But it's
that was not you. That was not discussed that you didn't want to do that.
No,
Between
I
you
had-
and I. You may have had your own reservations off.
I had said no. I have the
not-
messages
not
of me literally
when
rejecting
you
and
brought
saying
it
no,
to
thank
me.
you.
You know, like, I didn't know that you.
Now, it's really interesting. They're about to have this debate about what we call silent expectations. She didn't want to be on a show, but then didn't actually communicate that to him. But if you listen to her, she's also saying, like, that's what I wanted. I didn't want to be on a show. But she never actually communicated that with Nick. Why? Because once again, when we're going back to that avoidant trigger cycle trap, because avoidant struggle to share their thoughts, because avoidant struggle to share their wants and their needs and be assertive about it, what it does is it leaves them open to the avoidant trap, where someone does something several times over, we get frustrated, we get angry, and our response is probably not the kindest response, and that triggers the other person also to respond in kind in a different way, whether it's to avoid, whether it's not to talk, whether it's to shout back, whatever it is. And you see that play a role in their relationship. So as she discusses here about the resentment that she silently held onto him, that would have been a trigger, right? And it's funny because we saw this earlier on in the episodes where he was saying to her, you tell me when you're what you want when you're angry, but not necessarily when you need it. And that again speaks about you know, and so that then speaks to us about how people move when they are unable to really share their true sentiments. They become passive aggressive, but that passive aggressiveness then becomes a trigger. So his one is, she never really told me words of affirmation. She never told me, you know, that she really loved me and cared for me. And that then also was a trigger for him to be more avoidant. But she also felt like she couldn't speak up. The emotional volatility that he shared made it very difficult for her to want to share certain sentiments and feelings with him and be quite open and honest. And so we got both parties here being, again, in that avoidant trigger trap.
The things with JR and whatnot, we were able to come together as a couple again and have some breakthroughs, because we recognized that there were some very deep wounds that we triggered in each other and weren't showing up for each other in specific ways. You know, I wasn't holding space in certain ways, she wasn't holding space in certain ways, and we had conversations that I was hopeful to have to move forward. Unfortunately, at that point, the relationship had run its course.
So again, he mentions here about being triggered, and obviously that, you know, they both did things that triggered each other, and then a relationship runs its course. Now, what's really interesting is I'm going to provide a little bit of a clip here, going slightly back, slightly forward even, to break down where he spoke about not going on holiday in Mykonos. You know what? Forget it. You leave it alone. But he speaks about this as well, and I think this is interesting about the way that they view things as
Kind
well.
of like an absent boyfriend thing. But
did you think you'd survive the show?
I don't know. I honestly, like, I do think that we were at a really rocky point in our relationship, and I was like kind of wanting to just give it my all. And that's what happened with me going into the experience with JR, whatnot. A lot of stuff happened like that we don't see with Nick and I. And I almost wanted to just like leave the whole experience. And I was like, I owe it to my relationship to give it my all and be with him. And the thing is, it's like,
we wanted different things. We just wanted different things. I mean, when it comes down to it, we went to Europe the month before we knew we were going to get on the show. I had a friend's wedding that came up. She came with me. She wanted to go to Mykonos. This is something I have to own. Like, I'm really bad at making choices in the moment. I'm not a good planner. I get that. I go kind of like off the cuff. I definitely fly by the seat of my pants. Like, if I'm going to paint, I want to paint all night. Sometimes that takes 2 nights. Sometimes I'm not there during the day. And that is who I am. Like, I have to own that. And that can feel very shitty for a partner, I'm sure. I don't have the same love language as she has. And you know, I was trying to work on the physical touch aspect and get there, because it just is not something I naturally do. I think the other type of physical touch for us was intense and wonderful, but I'm just day to day, you know, hand holding and things. I somehow just haven't. I never developed that.
So notice also that he talks about not being able to develop his physical contact. It's something that dismissive avoidance, a lot of them can struggle with, because again, it feels very intimate, very close, very vulnerable. I myself have suffered with this when I was about 18. My first ever girlfriend, I struggled with physical touch. Because I assumed physical touch was sex, not necessarily just those little intimate things, and it felt very, 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 very violent at points, wanting to hold my hand. Why do you want to hold my hand? And so a lot of those things are dismissive of your own feelings and dismissiveness of the emotions that you actually feel. And so what can end up happening is you avoid things like cuddling, holding hands, you know, a little pet, a little touch, you know, being close to someone physically in proximity. It becomes very difficult to do because you're not in tune with your own emotions. And so someone else coming that close to you feels like manipulation. It feels like they're overwhelming you. It feels like they're doing too much. It feels like they're just overpowering you. And again, he's going to go on and talk about this holiday and how and what happened. Listen to this particular part.
That sort of, I guess, rhythm to how I show up. And she wanted to go to Mykonos, which was after that. I felt like Mykonos was too much, overwhelming, but I agreed to it reluctantly, which I shouldn't have done. And then I put her in a state of limbo, where basically I knew in my gut that I didn't want to go. But instead of just me being assertive and saying, I don't want to do that, and we're not doing that, and if you want to do that, go, I kind of,
You decided to go and be a baby?
I didn't go.
No,
Oh.
it's yeah. I mean, that's just a whole thing in itself. But that was
And so again, that was another issue, right? Instead of him being actually assertive about how his wants and needs are, he didn't do it. He actually just avoided the situation, let time pass, and then it came to pass. Okay, the time is gone. And what that is that inactivity from a dismissive avoidant. They don't want to actually do the thing, so they do what we call a stall, and they delay, and they kind of like prevent the thing from actually happening, rather than just being honest and saying, actually, I don't want to go. And it's because they're afraid and they're not feeling safe enough to be able to share their most intimate thoughts and say no to things, because they're afraid of upsetting the other person, and they're afraid of losing the other person. Once he gets past that, he'll be better. But what that does is it triggers the other party. It triggers them because now they're looking at you going, okay, so wait, hold on. You mean to tell me that he didn't want to go on a trip, and that he was telling me, that he felt like it was overwhelming, it's not too much, and that he actually didn't necessarily want to. He didn't say he didn't want to go, but his behavior showed me that he didn't want to go. And so, is it me? Does he not care about me anymore? Does he not love me anymore? That then begins to trigger in the mind of the fearful avoidant, and that then creates what we call oftentimes as well, the hot and the cold, because the fearful avoidant needs stability and consistency and safety emotionally, so that they don't go into the hot and cold perspective as well. So we're going to play a little bit of clip of that and get that.
That I needed to, that I'm, working on now. And I do think that Sandy and I are good mirrors for each other to evolve through separate relationships. And as you said, with the toxicity to it, there was a dynamic in the relationship prior to that. As I said, when we started, she was all very push-pull with me and kind of like wanted me when she wanted me, but then wanted to do her own thing. And I finally set a boundary around that, but then I gave into the boundary, and it ignited this part of us that was a lot of fun and a lot of, we had an incredible physical chemistry, and we always had a hell of a lot of laughs together, but we weren't serving each other in that safe place that clearly I was needing in that time.
So I'm curious.
And again, he's quite eloquently pointed out her hot and cold methods. And the hot and cold method, again, it's going to be a trigger for anybody dismissive, because they want to see consistency. And the fact they don't have consistency irks them and makes them not be able to trust, because they trust patterns. They trust, logical conclusions. They trust, A plus B plus C plus D, because they can trust that because it has a consistent pattern. It's regulated. But for the fearful avoidant Sandy, what she's also looking at is, if he is avoidant, then does he really care about me? Does he really want me? And what the avoidant does is it's trying to get the other person to want them, desire them, and care about them. So they go into a manipulative mode of blowing hot and then blowing cold, which is the coquette in the art of seduction. And so she plays this coquette role where she goes hot, she goes cold. And really and truly, it's actually a form of safety. She doesn't know how to ask for safety. She doesn't know how to get him to a place where he's able to willingly consider her emotional safety. So she developed mechanisms that are going to help her function in an unfunctional space. And so this cycle of a trigger is going to happen again and again, because as she does hot and cold, he feels that it's inconsistent and drifts away. But as he drifts away because of inconsistency, she does now hot and cold to bring him back in again and into alignment. Whew. Hey, listen, I don't want to talk too long. Like I said, I wanted to keep it nice and short, because I wanted to be able to just go straight to the point. There are more clips that we could actually show. My point of the matter is to say that there is an avoidant trigger cycle trap between the two of them, Sandy and Nick. The only way to kind of overcome it, in a sense, was actually for someone to take over and say, I'm not going to fall into the trap and the cycle of just trying to do things to make myself better. I'm going to look at the situation and see, what does it actually need from me? What is it that I actually can bring to the table that can bring stability, consistency, so the other party can feel safe? And if we're both doing that, we're both serving each other, then it shouldn't be the act of a place where we are triggered in a cycle, continually, because somebody goes, as soon as they see a cycle, like, actually stop. I know we're in a cycle. Let me say X, Y, and Z. So anyway, listen, guys, I'm going to love you and leave you. Let me know your thoughts down below. We're obviously doing some coaching still at Mercy. We'd love to hear from you guys as well. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Click on that bell button for notification uploads. Appreciate you guys. Still uploaded.